We've told you that we know what it takes to make it on Broadway because we've been there ourselves. Well, today we're telling you those stories. We're diving into how we began our careers, what we still want to accomplish, and what Cynthia's favorite musical is and why it's The Lion King. Welcome to part one of our Meet the Hosts episode series. I'm Chelsea Wilson, a performer turned voice teacher to Broadway stars and vocal coach on Broadway productions like The Phantom of the Opera, School of Rock, and more.
And I'm Cynthia Kortman Westphal, a Broadway music director, conductor, voice coach, and tenured faculty member at one of the top musical theater programs in the country.
Here on the Broadway Vocal Coach Podcast, you can expect real talk about the business, practical advice, and constant encouragement. We believe there's space for every artist in this industry. All you need is the right support. So consider us your two-woman hype team. Welcome to the Broadway Vocal Coach Podcast, where we help musical theater performers get unstuck and take the next step in their careers. Cynthia, is The Lion King your favorite musical? Or have I just made a wild assumption?
Well, it's definitely one of them. It's definitely one of them. You know my issue with favorites, Chelsea. I have a real issue with, I can't pick favorites. However, what I will say is the opening of Lion King, conducting the opening of Lion King, there is nothing like it. I've conducted some amazing shows, but when you're standing with the orchestra below you, the cast up in front of you and behind you coming down the aisles, and because you have to conduct the aisles, you get to literally turn around and see the reaction of the audience, and you see the tears streaming down, and you see the mouths hanging open. There's just truly nothing like it. So wow. The opening to Lion King, I may have to say, is one of my favorite conducting experiences. But you know I don't like using that word.
You've gotten you to pick one favorite. I'll count this as a win. We'll see how many more I get out of you by the time we're done. Okay, Cynthia, we are diving into your story today, and I cannot wait for our listeners to get to know a little bit more about you and all the incredible things you have done in your career. So let's just dive right in, shall we?
Yes, let's.
Let
me preface this by saying there is a reason why I've not ever been the actor on stage. I do enjoy the behind the scenes role. So this is a little hard for me.
Spotlight today.
To be in the spotlight it's not my favorite place to be, but we're going to do it. Let's do it.
Oh, that's great. It's just me and you. It's just me and you. It's okay, Cynthia. So, Cynthia, you were a classical piano major. You then went to grad school for classical piano performance. And coming out of grad school, you thought you were going to be an opera coach and work on opera productions. Spoiler alert, that's not what happened.
No.
You moved to New York City in 1990, and one night changed the course of your life. So tell us about that first night in New York and what first piqued your interest in musical theater.
Yeah, I had very little exposure to it. My only real exposure, I played, I think, one summer of summer stock at my college. You
went to school in Holland, Michigan.
And there was a summer stock company there that did shows over the summer, and for money, and I say for money because it truly was only for money. At the time, I was still pretty snobby about classical music, and I had a piano teacher who I loved, who really changed my life, changed my playing. And she was also not really a fan of me playing anything other than classical. And so even though I had played that summer of shows, it didn't really register. That was not the moment where I thought, this is what I want to do forever. It really just was sort of a job. And my mom had also taken me to a production of Cats. So that was my only professional show other than the summer stock, which I was behind the scenes on. I had only been an audience member at one production of Cats, which was a touring company. I think it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan when I saw it. So when I moved to New York, that was the extent of my musical theater knowledge. But the night that I moved to New York, that's kind of a long story on how I even ended up in New York on the night I got there. But I only knew one person in New York and they forgot to pick me up at the airport. So I ended up stowing my luggage at the airport. I took a bus into Times Square because it was the only location I recognized. So as I'm standing outside the airport trying to think of where do I go, I saw a bus that said Times Square, and I thought, well, I've heard of that.
That's a place.
I think I'll go there and just keep trying to get a hold of my friend. And of course, this is before cell phones, so you're just at the mercy of a payphone and the quarters in your pocket. So anyway, I got off the bus in Times Square shortly before 8. I think it was about 7:30 at night. And I'm just standing in the middle of Times Square, not knowing a soul, not knowing where I'm going to sleep tonight. I didn't even have the address of this person. I literally knew nothing. We didn't have phones. So I'm just standing in the middle of Times Square, full of anxiety. And I thought, I'm just going to go see a Broadway show because at least that will fill my time for the next couple hours and keep me safe and warm. And so I walked up to a ticket booth, and I don't even know how I decided what I was going to go see, but I walked up to a ticket booth. I spent $50 on a ticket, ended up somewhere in the balcony where I could look right down into the pit. And when the show started, it was
What
a
show
woman.
were you seeing?
Show I saw was Crazy for You. And I think there was a double whammy of why that night changed my life. Number one, it was a woman conducting. And there had been a woman who I worked with at the summer stock. And in retrospect, I see that now and think, okay, I had seen a woman conductor, and shout out to Linda Strauss for being that person back at Hope, because there were very few women conductors at the time. But seeing this woman conduct this orchestra was, I think, even more of an eye-opener of, oh, wow, people do this as a living. That must be her full-time career. It's not like she's a teacher and does something on the side. It was like, wow, that's a full-time job. And I think the other thing about Crazy for You is it was all Gershwin music. And in my classical snobbery, George Gershwin counted as legitimate music to me at the time, if I'm really honest. So that night, I literally said to myself, that's what I want to do. And I made a complete pivot in that moment. No more opera coaching. I want to be a Broadway music director or Broadway conductor. I don't think I even knew what a music director really was at the time, but Broadway conductor. I want to conduct on Broadway.
That's amazing. So the first job you had in New York was not that job. You worked your way up to that. Your first job was child wrangling. Am I correct?
Yes. Although, fun fact, my first job in New York City was on a Broadway show. So there's that.
Maybe explain what child wrangling is for folks who are a little afraid of that term that I just used. Like, excuse me, you're doing what?
It's basically the babysitter for kids who are in a Broadway show. Your job is to make sure they're in the right costume at the right time, in the right place at the right time, that they're getting fed and watered on a regular basis, that they're just where they need to be at the right time with the right costume, equipment, water bottle. You're basically just making sure the kids are getting their job done. So my first job in the city was as a sub. I was a sub child wrangler for $50 a show. I think at the time I did 2 or 3 shows a week. So very soon after that, I did get a restaurant job because $50 a show times 2 or 3 shows obviously was not going to pay the bills. So I was waiting tables pretty soon after that, in addition to doing Tommy. But then when Tommy closed, I used those child wrangling connections to get another child wrangling job, which was on The King and I, which at the time was starring Lou Diamond Phillips and Donna Murphy. And I stayed there for about a year. And I think with both of those shows, the gift of being able to see these incredible Broadway performers night after night after night in the wings, because as a child wrangler, you would often bring the kids right up to the stage. You would stand in the wings, wait for them to finish their thing, usher them back to the next entrance they had. And so I got to stand in the wings and watch Donna Murphy and Lou Diamond Phillips sing their epic songs night after night after night. I got to watch the entire ballet every night. That alone was just such a gift. And especially as someone who didn't grow up in musical theater or study musical theater, that I feel like was sort of my big initial education to watch people do an 8-show a week for long lengths of time was really incredible. And to see all the standbys go on and the swings and the understudies and see all these different performers go on playing these same parts was really such an education.
After child wrangling, or maybe you continued, you tell me if that was like continued on for many years, but what were some of your first professional jobs related to the music scene? Because that was clearly still your goal.
I did quite a lot of smaller jobs around the city. I guess I would call them off Broadway shows. My first show in New York was in a basement of a church on 53rd Street. And all of the black keys had cracked off. So the piano was basically just completely flat. Which, if you're a pianist, you know how hard that is to manage. So that just shows you where I started. I started in the basement of a church on 53rd with a piano that had no black keys raised on the piano.
Incredible.
And I also did a lot of auditions. I had kind of broken into the audition scene at that point. And through my classical training, I was a really good sight reader. So I started doing a lot of audition piano, which that was my education in learning repertoire, because I really didn't know any repertoire. And so I could sight read anything, but most of the time I was literally just, I'm sight reading. I have no idea how these songs are going. I was used to playing for a lot of classical singers. Like I said, I wanted to be an opera coach. So I was very used to following a singer. So it was easy to follow the singers, but I just didn't know any of this rep. I didn't know the shows that they were from. So I used to keep a list. I had a notebook that I would keep with me, and any song that someone brought in that I didn't know, I would write down the name of the song. And if I could tell, I would write down the show it's from, if it happened to say it somewhere on the music, which a lot of times it didn't. And when I think back on it and I think, you know, If I Loved You, what show is that from? I don't know.
Oh my gosh. There's honestly, it's hard for me to understand, Cynthia. I can't quite imagine a world where Cynthia Kortman Westphal doesn't know which show If I Loved You is from. It's from Carousel, by the way. Anyone who's wondering, it's from Carousel. I can't imagine this person. I can't imagine this version of you.
I mean, now I feel like it's more of a shocker when I don't know a show or don't know a piece of music. I kept a notebook. I kept a list of all the songs. And when I first started out playing audition piano, I would say if I played for 100 auditions in a day, I probably had a list of about 92 songs when I left at the end of the day. And I just kept that list, and every chance I had, these are back in the day also where you had to go to Lincoln Center a lot of the time to go listen to the music. You couldn't just, pull it up on Spotify. Yeah. So I was really intentional at that time about learning and trying to fill in my gaps. And so as time went on, I remember just getting through an audition day and thinking, oh my gosh, I only have 6 songs on my list today. Wow. That just felt like such an achievement to be learning all of this rep. So yeah, smaller jobs around the city, auditions were kind of the big thing that I was doing at the time while I was child wrangling.
How does one break into other jobs when it comes to, you still wanted to conduct on Broadway, you wanted to be playing in a Broadway pit. Like, how did you even begin to go about seeking out those jobs and then getting them?
Yeah, it's a little different for musicians, obviously, than it is for actors. But the main thing that I did was I just really hustled and met everybody I could and talked to everybody I could. So one of the first things I did when I was child wrangling on Tommy was I hung around in the pit, tried to get to know those musicians as much as I could. I was lucky enough to get piano lessons with the conductor of Tommy. I accosted him outside the stage door one night and I said, hi, I'm Cynthia. I just moved here from Michigan, and I would love to take some musical theater lessons and lessons in rock and roll, piano. And the first time I asked him, he sort of rebuffed me and said, yeah, I don't really give lessons unless someone's, really good and really has potential. And at the time I was like, okay. Sorry. Thank you. And then about a week later, I gathered up my courage again and I waited at the stage door again. And I said, hi, I talked to you last week. You said you only give lessons to people who are really good. I'm really good. I think I'm worth your time. I think I could really benefit from your expertise. I'm a really good player. I just don't know how to play these styles. And eventually he did give me lessons in rock pop piano, especially And so he was one of them that jobs that he didn't want to do, that were something that as a Broadway music director, he wasn't going to do, but people would often call him for jobs or recommendations. He started recommending me for smaller things, and those started to lead to bigger things. Another thing I did was I used to gather the playbills in the trash cans outside Times Square. So when the shows would let out, at 10:30, 11 o'clock, I would make the rounds and I would go to all the trash cans and pull out as many playbills as I could and look up who the conductors were, who the pianists were. I would then go to the giant Manhattan phone book, which was still in a paper hard copy at the time, and find their names. And I would just cold call them and say, hey, hi, my name is Cynthia. I just moved here from Michigan. And musicians watch the books of people who are playing on Broadway. So that means you go and sit next to a player in the pit and you watch them play their musical score. And it's a way that you can not only meet these people, but it's also a way to literally watch them play the music. And then you can decide, yes, this is something that would fit me really well. I think I could play this really well. And then you can try to get in as a sub. So when that player shows off, then you can try to get in as a sub and say to that player, hey, if you ever need someone to fill in, I think I would do a really good job on your book. So I was doing a lot of that. I was doing a lot of networking. I was doing a lot of cold calling. And then the guy who was giving me the rock lessons ended up recommending me for a show that was being done at the Goodman Theater in Chicago. And I think they'd had some trouble finding a sub for that show. And I got called at the last second. I had about 24 hours to fly there, learn the show, and play my first show. So it was another one of these instances where my sight reading ability and my sort of hustle, saying yes to anything, kind of paid off. And that went really well. I ended up playing that show for a couple of weeks. And it was during that time that Joe Church got offered The Lion King as the music director. And Julie Taymor at the time was really adamant about wanting a pit for The Lion King that was diverse and that had women included, which at the time was not a lot. There were not a lot of women musicians on Broadway. There's still, honestly, the percentage is really, really low. But because of that, my name got put on a short list of people to be considered for one of the keyboard books. And then, honestly, I just got really lucky because two other women turned down the Keyboard 3 book for Lion King, and I was the third person it was offered to. So it was a little bit of being in the right place at the right time with the right skill set, and then just getting a little bit lucky because two other people said no.
That's incredible. And your role really evolved with that show. You started playing Keyboard 3, and then at some point you were asked to conduct. You started filling in conducting. How did that role evolve?
Yeah, all shows have a number of subs so that you're covered at all times. It's just like having standbys or swings for the actors. So about a year into the run of Lion King, I started conducting as one of the subs, and then slowly kind of worked my way up from there to the point where I was conducting, 4 or 5 shows a week. And then was also in charge of most of the rehearsals. So I was scheduling all of the pianists for all of the rehearsals. I was doing a huge bulk of the rehearsals myself, conducting 4 or 5 times a week, playing my keyboard at that point, maybe only once or twice a week, because oftentimes I would even be in rehearsal during a show. We'd have multiple rooms going at the same time. Before Lion King, I did another show that eventually made it to Broadway. I had another show called Gershwin's Fascinating Rhythm that had done an out-of-town tryout in Hartford. And when I interviewed for that position, I'd never conducted in my life. And I remember sitting at this cafe with the person who was writing all of the arrangements for the show. And he asked me, we're considering having the orchestra on stage, and we really need a pianist. The reason I was even interviewed was because the way the show was put together at the time was the conductor was going to be at a grand piano and be conducting the orchestra. So you were going to do a little of both. You were going to conduct some from the piano. You were going to conduct some with the stick. From the piano, you were going to play the Gershwin Preludes, Rhapsody in Blue, Concerto in F. I mean, these are major, heavy classical pieces.
Yeah.
And then with a stick, you're going to conduct more of the popular songs of George and Ira Gershwin, and all on stage. So the piano part, I'm like, great, all that's in my repertoire already. I already know it. And that was, I think, the piece that they were having trouble finding. They were finding musicians who could obviously conduct and do the more popular tunes, but to find someone with the classical chops to play these other pieces, I think was why I got on that short list. And I still remember when he asked me, so in terms of your conducting, do you feel like you have an affinity for stick conducting or piano conducting more than the other? And I said, I'm equally comfortable at both. And that's all I said. And I thought, I'm not lying. I've never done either, so I'm equally comfortable at both.
Exactly.
The minute I finished that interview, I made a phone call to someone who then got me a recommendation for a conducting teacher. And I said, I have a feeling this job's going to go my way. I need to learn how to conduct now.
Unreal.
So I had the benefit, I think we did about 70 shows out of town, and I had done all of that before I got Lion King. So by the time I got to Lion King, I had thankfully already had some conducting experience, both from the piano and with a stick and over a long length of time, which is always the gift. You know, when you can do something over and over and over, that is such a great way to really learn. So I was really lucky in that. Mm-hmm.
Wow, it's incredible.
Equally comfortable at both.
Equally uncomfortable at both.
Yeah,
you could have also answered.
I could have.
You just celebrated 25 years of The Lion King on Broadway, which I'm sure was just incredible. So congratulations to you and that whole team. You've seen that show through so much and had the opportunity to do so many other things since that. I mean, you were in that, correct me if I'm wrong, you did Lion King on Broadway for 7 years. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 7 years and almost 3,000 performances.
There's so much you learn doing a long running show like that.
Yes.
So 2004, 7 years into The Lion King, we'll kind of speed people through your personal life. You're married now, right? You've been married for a short period of time.
Very short. Yeah, very short. I think we'd been married a month.
Wow.
When this conversation came up.
So in 2004, you ended up making a really big pivot to teaching and you left The Lion King and said, I'm going to pursue this opportunity, which ended up being a teaching position at U of M. So talk to us about how this pivot came to be and why and how you felt that was an opportunity you wanted to take. You were leaving something very comfortable and stepping into something new. What was that like?
Yeah, it was the pivot that I wasn't really ready to make, and you could not ever have made me thought I would make that pivot ever. I was a Manhattan girl all the way. I thought I would live in Manhattan for the rest of my life.
Me too.
This was also when I didn't think I would have any kids ever. I was very much on that train as well. I was a career girl all the way. And what happened was after we got married, we thought, we'd both been living in New York for over 10 years. We had just met the year before, but we had each been renting in our respective apartments for over 10 years. And we thought we should buy a place. So we started looking in Manhattan to buy a place. And as you know, apartment prices in New York are
abysmal.
Tricky.
Difficult.
Yeah. And what I found was, yes, we can afford this. And yes, we can afford the neighborhood we want and a 2-bedroom. We can do it. And if I do it, I will be locked into this show for the rest of my life. It was sort of one of those things where the amount of money I was making, conducting that much on Lion King, was probably about the most money I was ever going to make in the field of musical theater. I mean, there are a few other jobs that in musical theater, musician world that do pay a little higher, but honestly not for women at that time. That was just the reality. So I knew that I was probably making as much as I was ever going to make. And so since I'd been at Lion King for 7 years already, the idea that I might need to stay there forever was just a little more than I could wrap my head around. So one day we were jogging in Central Park and we started talking about, do we think about moving to New Jersey? What if we look in Westchester? What if we look in Connecticut? And I finally said, I didn't move to Manhattan to live in New Jersey. I want to live in Manhattan. And if I can't live in Manhattan, honestly, maybe we live anywhere. But, we were jogging in Central Park. This wasn't an actual conversation. This was like
jogging conversation.
Jogging
not an
banter.
Conversation.
It wasn't real. So I just said to him, if you could live anywhere else in the country, where would it be? And he said, I don't know, Ann Arbor. I think he said Madison as well, but Ann Arbor was the first place he listed. And I
Two
was
towns in Michigan.
Ann Arbor, why would you even say that? You've never been to Michigan. Why would you say that? And at the time, my new husband, he wasn't an urban planner at that time, but he had a very strong interest in urban planning. And so he said, I just always read it on these top 10 places to live in the country. It's always top on the list. So, and that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And the next day I was sitting in the apartment and I thought, I'd played a million auditions at that point. I'd seen a million resumes, and I remember seeing University of Michigan on a lot of resumes. And I had, heard the buzz about this program. And I thought, okay, wait, is that in Ann Arbor? Is that where this program is? So I went online. We finally had internet. We've now evolved to have internet. I went online and there was a job posting for a music director at University of Michigan. And it kind of spelled out exactly what I do, what I did, what my expertise was. So he came home that night and I said, so how serious were you about Ann Arbor? And I told him about this job and he said, well, you should apply. I mean, what are the chances that you're going to get it? And I'm like, I know, I'm never going to get it. Sure, I'll just apply. Because I'd never taught a day in my life. I thought, okay, I mean, I had taught some piano, but I had never taught, obviously, at a college level. So I applied, and this was, I think, in October, and I didn't find out that I even got an interview, I think, till March. So I kind of forgot about it. I mean, I put the application in, and then I remember being kind of shocked when somebody called me in March asking for an interview. And then I went out for the interview and then ended up getting offered the job. And at that point, I remember the pay was substantially less than my Broadway show. So it was I remember we were like, we can't go for that. That seems bananas. But then we kind of felt like, okay, wait, there were such a number of little coincidences that had kind of happened along the way to getting to this point that I finally said, don't you feel like God or the universe is just putting a big old neon sign that says move to Ann Arbor? And the part that finally tipped me was I thought, well, let me just ask for a leave of absence. They probably won't give it to me at Lion King because who's going to give me a 9-month leave of absence? But I might as well ask. And I asked and they gave it to me. So at that point, we had nothing to lose. The expectation was I'll go teach for this year and then I can come back and there'll be a nice little break from Lion King. I'll come back all renewed and ready to go. And so we moved out in 2004 and I taught for the year. And then my husband decided to go back and get a master's at University of Michigan. And so by the time that first year was wrapping up and my husband had another year left in his master's, and now we're talking about maybe having a baby and all those things, I finally just decided to take the leap and call it on the Broadway. And so I ended up telling them I wasn't coming back and I stayed at Michigan. And that was a huge decision.
A huge decision.
Yeah.
And looking back on that, you've really turned your focus over the last 18 years to education and teaching and working with students. But you've also had so many incredible professional opportunities as a conductor, as a music director. So how do those two things align? How do those two things maybe support each other over the last almost 2 decades?
Yeah, it was so fascinating because I felt like by the time I left New York City, I had done 3 Broadway shows as a pianist and conductor. And then when I moved to Michigan to teach, I kind of thought that would be over. And instead, I played for well over a dozen, maybe 15, 16 national tours. So all the tours that came through Detroit at the time, I played for all of those. I did months long on Wicked. I did a long stint on Les Mis. I did week-long stints on a lot of things. But for some of the long-running shows, I got to do actual big chunks of that. So again, just to have that opportunity to continue to work at these high levels of Broadway national tours. It was so fulfilling because I felt like I was kind of getting my cake and eating it too. It was so exciting. I loved playing my Broadway shows, but 7 years of the same show started getting hard. So being able to play one Broadway national tour after another was so exciting to me at the time. And then my first year of teaching, 2 of my students were Justin Paul and Benj Pasek.
You might have heard of them.
Yeah, you may have heard of them. So fast forwarded a few years to when they started writing and are now writing Broadway shows. And I ended up doing 4 years on A Christmas Story that they wrote. So 2 years on Broadway, 1 year of the national tour, and then 1 year of helping to mount the tour following the Broadway run. So that was a huge gift to get to do that.
Quick side note on A Christmas Story, because one of those years, I think it was the year that you were mounting the off-Broadway production, you brought me in and I recorded the radio spots for that tour. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember that.
So people across the country got to hear my voice as the mother. And I was a little salty. I was like, how about you just cast me to play the mother instead of just do the radio spots? But like, that's cool too.
Yes,
I was far too young. Far too young.
Oh,
but anyways, that's fun. That's a fun little full circle moment there too.
I love that. Yeah.
But that led to other projects and other shows.
Yeah. Like I got to do a production at the Fifth Avenue in Seattle. I was a part of the first all-women creative team that theater had ever seen. That was very exciting. I did a year-long tour. I was the first music director of the national tour of Come From Away that I was able to do while on sabbatical at U of M. So
you took your whole family to go do that.
I took the whole family. Yep. We pulled our 2 kids out of school for a year. My husband took a year off. We traveled as a little pack. It was amazing. So I've just been really lucky to be able to continue to do a lot of professional work, even while having the full-time day job at Michigan.
Yeah. And, somewhere along the line here too, let's add this in. And we get into this in an upcoming episode about our voice teacher journey, but you added in a singing element to all of this as well. You're an accomplished conductor, music director, pianist at this time. And some point about 10, 12, 15 years ago, a light bulb went off and was like, I want to know more about the voice. Tell me briefly about that experience. And I know we'll dive into more of that in a later episode.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the first seed that was planted was when we were in previews for Lion King on Broadway. One of our singers was really struggling with literally just the high note in a song and was struggling with consistency and cracking. And I remember Julie Taymor going up to the music director and saying, "Fix it." And I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know that I would know how to fix that. And I want to be a Broadway music director, and this is what I want to do. Oh my gosh, the pressure of that was terrifying. And then over the years of coaching all of those singers at Lion King, by that point, I had a lot of private clients as well that I was coaching. And then as I started teaching, I felt really confident in my ability to know what I was trying to achieve with a singer. I felt really confident in my knowledge of the repertoire, knowledge of the context of the repertoire, knowledge of the specific style or vocal quality that it needed, but I didn't always know how to get there. And I certainly didn't feel confident in knowing how to get there with a singer in a way that would be sustainable over an 8-show week. But, it had been on my radar for a very long time. So I had been gleaning things over the years, but it wasn't until, I guess it was about 15 years ago, that we had someone come and do a vocal masterclass at Michigan. And the transformation that he got from these singers in such a short period of time blew my mind so much. And so, as I do with everybody who comes and does a masterclass, I went up to him afterward just to say thank you for coming, and that was amazing. And instead of getting the words out, "Thank you for coming," I spontaneously burst into ugly crying tears. And I'm not joking. I just was sobbing. And I said, "I don't want to teach anymore until I can do what you do." And I really meant that. I don't think I've ever felt quite so humbled about what I don't know. And it was in that moment that I thought, I really do want to stop teaching. I want to get back into training. I want to study. I want to learn what you do. And then I'll hang my shingle out again and call myself a vocal coach. But I really, in that moment, just felt like I don't know anything. I know nothing. So that started me on a journey of teacher training. And I dove so heavily into teacher training and voice teacher training and
voice technique, everything singing.
Everything singing. Yep. And so I'm now a certified master trainer in Estill voice, which is the thing I'm certified in, but I want to know about all the things. I want to know everything about voice that I can. So I still kind of grab onto anything I can, learn anything I can. But I think the thing for me that worked really well with Estill was one of the main ways they train you is that you have to be able to demonstrate that you can do everything that you're going to have to teach. So as a pianist and a music director, that was pivotal for me because it forced me to open my own mouth, figure out my own instrument and my own voice. And that was sort of life-changing for me, being able to demonstrate, being able to feel that I know what's going on for myself because I had to make that sound myself.
Right.
And it made me so much more confident than coaching other singers.
Yeah. And empathetic too. Like, wow, this is hard.
Yes. 100%.
You have really experienced this business from all angles, from a spectator in 1995 in the back of the house, crazy for you, to a pianist in the pit, a conductor, a music director, now a coach, now a teacher. So what advice might you offer to musical theater performers from all the places you've sat and all the things you've experienced? What advice do you have for those who might be listening?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. A couple things, I guess. One, just saying yes. Say yes to as much as you can. It's interesting how many auditions I've sat through where when a singer is given an adjustment or an actor is given an adjustment, anything from like, hey, could you do that in a German accent? Oh, I don't do German accents. I'm like, just say you do and give it a shot. It might be a mess, but you know what? It's going to show us that you are creative and that you're willing to dive in and that you're willing to get in the sandbox with us all while we try to figure something out. So things like that. I've just seen a lot of people shy away in auditions for fear of looking silly, looking bad, not knowing what they're doing. Whereas the folks who say yes, even if it's a true disaster, and sometimes it is, the room just applauds. We're all just like, thank you for going for it. Good for you. We love that. And they'll leave the room and we'll think that person was awesome. I love that they just went for it, even though they didn't know what they were doing. So just like me saying yes to, yes, I am equally comfortable in both. Just saying yes to as much as you can, and with the knowledge that you can figure it out later, or with the knowledge that they will teach you how to do it if you show that you are game to try. So I would say that. And the other thing I would say is trying to get out of the mindset of playing any kind of game or trying to imagine what you think the table is thinking or looking for or wanting, which is the hardest thing, I know. But often it's folks who come in and maybe they aren't even always quite right for the production, or maybe they aren't singing quite the right fit of material, but they are so authentically themselves or charismatic in some way, or just, you can tell they just have a pure joy of performing, versus the folks that you can tell are trying to somehow fit into what they think you might want. And there's just such a difference in an audition when someone comes in with wild abandon versus trying to carefully parse out what they think might be needed. So that is the hardest thing to do, I know. But with the right support, you can do it.
I think that's great advice. I think you bring so much wisdom to our clients in the BBC membership, and I've learned so much from you. And I do think that's an incredible piece of wisdom. Don't play the game. Be yourself. Yourself is going to win you jobs and going to forge your own unique career. And that's all you can ask for, I think.
There was a quote that I used in a newsletter that we sent to our clients, and I love this. It's an Elizabeth Gilbert quote, and she wrote a book that I love that I recommend to everybody in the arts called Big Magic. And one of the quotes from the book is, find the thing you love to do so much that the words success and failure, in essence, become irrelevant. And I love that. And I love that mindset for walking into an audition room. I have another colleague who likes to call auditions performance appointments. So rather than saying I have an audition at 11, I have a performance appointment at 11. And I love that because that's that mindset of I love to sing. I love to act. I love to do it so much. I don't care whether I book it or not. I get to sing at 11 for a group of people. I have an appointment to sing. Yippee. There's something kind of fun about that. And I think in this business, playing the long game is better than playing the short game and guessing of what you think the outcome could be or should be. But playing that long game of, I just love to do this. I love to perform. I love to sing. If the only chance I get to sing are in these 5 auditions I have this week, great. I get to sing 5 times this week. I mean, for a singer, that's actually really exciting. Mm-hmm. That's your chance to act and sing this week or in those auditions. And so finding the thing that you love to do so much that the words success and failure just don't even mean anything anymore because you just love to do it. Again, easier said than done, but that is my own goal as well, is that I love music so much. I love singing. I love playing. I love doing all that so much that I try to keep in the mindset of it doesn't matter whether I'm doing a tour, whether I'm playing something for my kids' preschool. I just love to do it. Mm-hmm. And I get happy to do it.
We are happy that you are happy to do it. I gained so much from you and your experience. Thanks, Cynthia. Thank you so much. I learned new things about you today, and I have a feeling our listeners will as well. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a screenshot and tag us on Instagram at Broadway Vocal Coach. You can share this episode with a friend, and please consider leaving us a review. If something resonates with you from today's episode, we want to hear about it. You can DM us on Instagram or send us an email, hello@bwayvocalcoach.com. And if you're ready to get expert mentorship and ongoing training, then you are invited to join us inside the BBC membership. Book a free consult with us. We can't wait to hear your story and help you take the next step in your career. Thanks for listening.